Good to see you. As always. What's up?
What?
What'd you say?
I said, you too, buddy.
Wait, are we really on interest groups today? Didn't you just?
Yeah.
Oh, you already did sin? Did I lecture on sin?
No.
Ah.
Baseball.
Did I at least post the 10 lecture?
That's a good question.
I don't know.
I didn't do that either. All right, well, so you took a test without a lecture. Hope you did all right. Not trying to be like mean or sarcastic. I really do hope that you did all right. All right. Well, no. Like I would go with there's a really high probability. I also did not post the lecture because, hey, it is what it is. All right, so we've already done political parties. Then we're on interest groups, and then we'll do media, and that'll be the last one for this unit, and then you'll take another test because we just do 3 chapters and a test. This whole unit, since I didn't lecture last time since I wasn't here, this whole unit is called linkage institutions. And so I hate to be the one to tell you this, like, I mean, as a teacher, like, I'm really not supposed to tell you this, but y'all know me, I'm gonna be honest with you anyways. Like, you're not gonna change the world, right? And the reason I say you're not gonna change the world is because you're literally one person out of like 7.7 billion, right? But if you get enough people like with you, you can change the world. You just can't do it by yourself. So when we talk about like changing government and like linkage institutions and whatnot, this is sort of what we're looking at, right? Like if you want to change government, like no offense, Ted Cruz is not going to listen to you, right? But like if you and enough other people that are of voting age, because Ted Cruz is not listening to any 16-year-old because he doesn't care because you can't vote for him, or more importantly, you can't vote against him, so he really doesn't care. But if you and your voting age cohorts and friends all get together and there's enough of you, you could actually get Ted Cruz to do something, right? Maybe, I don't know. I use Ted Cruz as the example because every time I have students that go on a little DC field trip where they get to meet their congressman, Ted Cruz conveniently ducks out the back right before the meet and greet. So, I don't know. All right, so what is an interest group? We will define an interest group as a group of people with an interest, which is like the worst way to define anything, but y'all know what a group is, yes? I mean, do I really need to be like a collective of people, right? Like y'all know what a group is, you know what an interest is, yes? Some shared common goal, okay? So it's a group of people with a shared common goal or a shared interest, hence interest group. And now that does bring us to the interesting question, are political parties interest groups? Angelica, why do you say that? So it's a group of people with a shared interest. Okay, and so yes, you could count a political party as an interest group. We count them separately because interest groups, for the most part, are narrowly focused, and political parties are very broadly focused, right? Then there's also one other difference between political parties and interest groups, right? What do political parties seek to do? What's their primary purpose? What? Win what? Oh, an election, right? To win an election, that's their primary purpose. What is an interest group's primary purpose? To influence governments, right? To get their policy initiatives enacted. That's the big difference, right? Now, yeah, obviously political parties want to initiate their policy initiatives and goals, but they want to do that through winning elections first, all right? So the characterization of interest groups, we just did that, okay? I literally just characterized interest groups. Now, this goes back to like unit 1, right? Theoretically, this is just theory, not practice, theory. Interest groups are awesome because it's part of pluralism, right? You remember that term from the very beginning of the unit, very beginning of the semester? Pluralism is the idea that we have a whole bunch of different groups, and those groups sort of share power, and people compromise on things, and then we get things done, right? Okay, kind of like the conversation that 3 of us had the other day when we talked about all those different political parties and how in other systems, not the American system, but in other systems, nobody has a majority, and so they have to compromise with one another. And sometimes you work with this group, sometimes you work against that group, whatever. Theoretically, we do what's in the general best interest of the country. And that's the idea of pluralism. And so that's sort of how interest groups are supposed to function. The reality is that's really not the case, because ultimately interest groups more than likely end up in sort of hyper pluralism. But also every time you have like an interest group that arises, and I'll use the same sort of examples routinely throughout the lesson today, right? But like the NRA, right? What does the NRA care about? Guns, right? America, everybody carry guns, right? That's the NRA, National Rifle Association, right? That's an interest group, right? They're trying to get everybody to carry guns. In reaction to that, you have the, I think it's called R-Town, I think is the name of the interest group that was created after Sandy Hook in order to try to like get rid of guns. So for every interest group, there's generally like an anti-interest group, right? Right. Like obviously you realize this in terms of like pro-life, pro-choice, right? For every pro-life person there's a pro-choice person. And interest groups are the same thing. And because they're now sort of trying to actively work against one another, there's not a lot of compromise that's reached and not a whole lot gets done. But interest groups are protected constitutionally, right? Because you have freedom of speech, groups have freedom of speech, you have freedom of assembly, so you can like get together with people, and you have a right to petition the government, right? Freedom of petition, which just means I want the government to go and do this for me. Doesn't mean the government will do it, but you're at least allowed to ask. Additionally, interest groups have sort of become a fairly prominent negative in terms of like political advertising and economic politics, right? Interest groups give significant sums of money to congressional candidates, specifically generally incumbent congressional candidates, through what are called PACs, right? Political action committees. So somebody like Ted Cruz raises millions and millions of dollars annually from political action committees that he can then use to run for re-election. There is, but it's sort of complex because one, you can take money from a wide number of PACs, right? Like there's no limitation on the number of PACs you can take money from. And additionally, PACs are allowed to donate annually. They're allowed to also donate, like in an election year, they can donate, theoretically, they could donate like 3 or 4 times the maximum amount within an election year, because they can donate the max towards your primary campaign. And then if you have a runoff in the primary, which sometimes happens, they can redonate the max amount for that. And then if you win that, you have a general election, right? And they can redonate to that. And then like in Georgia, you might have a runoff to the general election. So they can read it. So like it's per election. So there's a lot of loopholes in terms of the amount of money that can be given, right? This is why a lot of people, and specifically on the left side generally, would like to see Citizens United overturned, because Citizens United sort of creates this explosion then of more money in politics, right? So you go back 20 years ago on a presidential campaign, you might have spent, $100, $200 million, right, to run for president of the United States. Okay. Mike Bloomberg spent $600 million of his own money to run for president of the United States for 3 weeks and received 0 votes. 0. Dude just dropped 600 mil for 0 votes, right? And that's due in large part to Citizens United and interest groups and political action committees. And then what we call super PACs. And we'll get into that at some point. We're going to have like a campaign finance day where I just feel sort of dirty talking about like all of the massive amounts of money that go into politics and how like none of us will ever actually be able to run for Congress because we just can't afford it. I mean, I say that and I'm going to run for Congress next year, but no, I really am. Oh, did we talk about this? The project in the fall? No, in the fall, the project for the AP government class, because they're supposed to have a project-based learning, is going to be figuring out the actual bureaucratic steps and process to get somebody on the ballot in an election. And so they're going to put me on the ballot. I'm gonna get on the ballot, and then in the spring classes are their project is gonna be run my campaign.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the students are just doing free labor.
This is very cynical yet genius.
Oh, I know. I mean, here's the funny thing. There's a couple of teachers that know about this that are like, "Oh my God, you're gonna end up on the news." No, I'm not. Nobody's gonna care.
I mean,
I will literally get I will get like 6 votes probably.
I mean, even all
What if
teachers
they all
in
vote for
school. Yeah, what they vote for you?
Okay, but here's the thing. Even if and let's just assume for the sake of argument, every student that I've ever taught, right? Every student I've ever taught, so I teach roughly 200 kids a year, right?
But what if we all campaign on our social media?
Well,
And
but let's just say for the sake of argument that all of them were registered to vote, which is a huge stretch, right? And all of them voted for me, which is also a huge stretch because I'm sure that there's at least a handful of kids that hate me and don't like me, right? For whatever reasons, right? I'm sure. And so now 7 years, 200 kids, so that's 1,400. That's it, 1,400 votes, right? In a congressional district of 75,000, excuse me, 750,000, excuse me. I can't speak. 750,000 people, and I got 1,400 votes.
What if we get the parents? That'll be kind of cool.
yeah, I mean.
Okay, look, I maybe get like 1 or 2%. Haha, it would be kind of funny. I think it would be funny. I'm gonna laugh at this. I think it's entertaining. And if y'all haven't figured out, I actually do things literally just to entertain myself. But I also think that it would be a good project for the kids so that they could learn. But that's back on political parties, which is the last unit. Because another thing that they will learn, is I can't run as a Republican or a Democrat, which is actually probably a good thing because I don't want y'all to know whether I'm a Republican or a Democrat. Spoiler alert, I'm neither. I hate them both. But it costs money to run as a Republican or a Democrat. It's free to run as an independent. You'll also never win as an independent. Whatever. These are just a variety of types of interest groups. Okay. Interest group, as far as representation goes, because we are talking about this in terms of it being a linkage institution, right? Like it links us to government. It helps government represent what we want. That representation is wildly unequal, right? Because it costs money to join an interest group. Guess who doesn't have money? Me. And poor people, right? Poor people don't have money. I don't have money either. I have 3 children. Children are expensive. Don't do it. So is marriage. Sam, don't do that either. No, my wife actually is not. I don't want to call her cheap, but my wife is frugal, which I love. Anyway, completely off topic. So in reality, interest groups are only really representative of richer people, right? Because they have disposable income that they can give to interest groups, right? And therefore, there are interest groups for like rich people's whatever, right? Like, I don't know, but I'd be willing to guess there's some sort of like yachting interest group, right? On the other hand, there is no interest group for like poor urban housing because those people can't organize because they don't have the disposable income to give to an interest group to advocate for them, because if they had disposable income, they're probably not living in the ghetto in the first place. Like, that's how I would spend my money first, rather than being like, hey, let me hire a lobbyist to go to Washington, D.C. to create better regulations so that my ghetto apartment isn't quite as ghetto. No, if I've got the extra money, I'm just leaving the ghetto, forget the rest of you all, right? So, yeah. Predominantly interest groups are a rich person sort of deal. Now, the success of interest groups can basically be boiled down to sort of these concepts, right? So like, how's their leadership, how's their fundraising, their members, like that sort of thing, right? So when you look at leadership, obviously leadership is critical. If you don't have good leadership, your interest group generally is not going to garner any sort of, publicity, right? National audience. people aren't going to really know anything about it. Usually, a lot of interest groups are sort of created at a grassroots level. Do we know what grassroots means? Grassroots sort of means the bottom up, right? So a lot of our interest groups are created sort of by the common people, and then as they gather support and they become more prominent, then they can actually get things done, right? Two, money. So obviously interest groups need money in order to function. Everything needs money in order to function. There are a number of ways that they can do this. One is through fundraising, one is through membership fees. But then with like membership fees, there's also like some issues around that. And we'll talk about that with the AARP. And I don't know what the AARP stands for, except for the RP is retired people or retired persons. It's the interest group for old folks, right? And so some people will join that interest group solely because that interest group like has a membership card, and that membership card gets you like a discount on dinner at Applebee's if you eat before like 4:30, right? That's when old folks eat dinner. And, I don't know if Applebee's really does that or not. I just picked the worst restaurant I know
Applebee's is not the worst restaurant.
of.
They sell cheap food and it's good.
It is not good.
It is good.
I worked there in high school. I waited tables at Applebee's, and if you actually ever see the movie Waiting, right, with Ryan Reynolds, if you've ever waited tables, it's kind of required viewing. That movie is actually based on an Applebee's.
What's wrong with Applebee's? I like that food.
I worked there for years. There's like 3 decent things to eat.
Their food's pretty dang.
What do you eat?
I like their mashed potatoes.
Okay.
I don't remember off the top of my head. What
Okay, their mashed potatoes come frozen in a bag.
I don't care. They're
Okay.
good.
All right. Well, anyway, moving on.
They're like $1. Their mashed potatoes are like $1.99.
Moving on. Members, right? Your membership type matters. Although ironically, believe it or not, not always is the more people sort of the better. You can actually end up in instances in which the membership of your interest group becomes too large, and then there's infighting within the interest group, and so that kind of like derails the interest group's interest in the first place. That being said, if there's like an interest group of 4 people, like they're not getting anything done either, right? Like there's a sweet spot in that. Also with interest groups, there is something called the free rider problem, which is a relatively significant problem because people that are not part of the interest group will always benefit from the successes of an interest group, right? So for instance, the Sierra Club, which is an environmental organization in California, right? The Sierra Club is they advocate for like clean air and keeping like one of those things called the personal watercraft, like jet skis out of Lake Tahoe, because apparently jet skis pollute worse than boats. I don't really know how this works. And so like it pollutes Lake Tahoe. And so the Sierra Club wants to keep Lake Tahoe like pristine. Because if you've ever been to Tahoe, it really is a beautiful, beautiful lake. And the water is like crystal clear because it's freezing. And so nothing can grow there. So you can literally like see the bottom of the lake. Like you can see like 10 feet down and see the bottom of the lake. It's kind of like amazing, right? Whereas like most lakes, you can't see anything under the surface because there's algae and things like that. Tahoe's too cold. But obviously, if I'm, because I lived in California, right? Like I was never a member of the Sierra Club, but obviously I've been to Lake Tahoe. Just explained it to you. Did I get to benefit from like the clean air at Lake Tahoe and the clean lake water? Yes, I did. That makes me a free rider. I'm not helping the interest group at all, but I'm benefiting from what the interest group is doing. Okay, and so that's kind of a common problem within interest groups. We're going to skip that. Why do we join the interest groups? Sometimes interest groups have what are called selective benefits, which are benefits that only go to the members. which sometimes helps. And those selected benefits can be a wide variety of things, from like monetary incentives like the AARP's little discount card, which I honestly don't know if it gets you a discount, but it does get you like discounts on car insurance sometimes, or like hotels, or things like that. Like you'll see, you'll actually see like a little AARP sticker outside of like some hotels. If you have an AARP membership card, you get 5% off your hotel cost or whatever, right? Some of those selected benefits are informational. You might get like a newsletter, or something that tells you what's going on, yada, yada, yada. Some of them can be solitary benefits, which is sort of like more personal, socializing. I don't know, maybe if someday in many years from now, like my wife passes and I'm still left and my children decide they hate me and they don't want to come visit or whatever, I might go join some sort of interest group just so I'm not alone in my house all the time, because that would bore the ever living bejesus out of me. All right. And then purpose of benefits are just sort of like literally, it's like patting yourself on the back. Like, yay, I'm saving the environment. I'm a good person. Right? Like, I feel good about myself today. So nobody, I mean, you care, but that's, again, very personal. All right. Interest groups are growing currently. Like we have more and more interest groups that are being created for a variety of reasons. One, society as society becomes more complex, right? And obviously you realize that society is significantly more complex for your generation than it was for my generation, more complex for my generation than my parents' generation, right? Like on and on and on back, right? Because I'm pretty sure like my great-grandfather, all he really had to worry about was like not being eaten by a bear, right? Whereas you have to figure out how like, not have somebody hack your cell phone and spy on your, like text messages, right? And God forbid, like you send the wrong text message to some boy or girl that you like, and then you worry about how they react, so whatever, right? But obviously, as society becomes significantly more complex, more interest groups will rise out of that, because then the interest groups are going to try to like, dictate some aspects of that, like free internet, right? Or aviation, all sorts of technological advancements deal with that aspect. But technological advancements also make it easier for interest groups to sort of be created and be successful, because obviously now the internet becomes a lot easier sort of tool to get your concept out there, right? Like Sierra said a minute ago, like maybe y'all like, I don't know, maybe y'all will find my little project next year comical, and Sierra will like campaign for me online and like try to talk people into voting for me because she thinks it's entertaining. I don't know. She'll probably forget all about me by like June 1st. But the ease of communication, right? As communication has gotten a lot easier, a lot faster, and a lot broader, meaning you can reach more people now. That significantly changes interest groups, right? And so while a lot of interest groups are created as grassroots interest groups, you probably do need to at least be aware of the term astroturfing, which is basically this idea of like elites creating an interest group and making it look like it's grassroots, right? Like trying to use the same tools as grassroots to make it look like, oh, the people love this. No, the people don't. No, they don't. You're manipulating people. Oh, of a astroturfing movement? I can't think of one off the top of my head, but you could Google it and probably find one relatively easily. I mean, it's a relatively new term. So.
There's no like, interesting big businesses.
Well, yeah, because it's like I said, it's top down.
Social media marketing. Is that you're saying social media
So the National Smokers Alliance would be one, which was really created by like RJ Reynolds and cigarette companies. Because who in their right mind is going to be like, yeah, you know what grassroots organization we need? One that will kill us all. Right? But obviously, like cigarette companies want to make their money. Right? And like that's one of those examples that's kind of like a weird example anyways, because in reality, like cigarette companies need like people to buy their product, but their product kills people. So what do they need? They need new people to buy it. Because you can't like you're not going to have somebody that smokes for like 60 years. You probably killed them in half that time. Right? ARPs, sort of examples. I'll let you look through some of these on your own. The proliferation of groups, that's just what I was talking about a minute ago, right? So there's new groups that are being formed as a result of, again, increasing complexities in society, but also increases in sort of government regulation. Like every time government does something new, there's generally an interest group that's going to rise up to try to tell government how to do it, right? So there's that aspect. Interest groups try to influence government predominantly through something called lobbying. And lobbying is a little loaded because a lot of the times lobbying is sort of explained as this weird pseudo dating, awkward sort of relationship, right? Like if you go and look at Jack Abramoff, who is a famous lobbyist who went to jail for a couple of years because he defrauded his clients and whatnot. But basically, like there's rules in place that like you take a congressman out to dinner, and so long as you discuss a piece of legislation that you're trying to get them to vote a certain way on, right? Then it's like a business dinner, right? And so you can write off all the expenses to it. So literally, you take the congressman out and you buy him like the Kobe beef fillet with the lobster tail, right, and the asparagus. I don't know what is an expensive side. Not Applebee's mashed potatoes, right? But like an expensive side, and like like caviar for an appetizer, like $300 scotch as like your drink, or like a $3,000 bottle of wine. But I'm telling you, like this meal could come up to like just you and the congressman. It could be thousands of dollars, right, for a single meal. And then you put it on your little company card if you're the lobbyist. So you met with Ted Cruz and you did all this, and then Ted Cruz is going to vote the way you want him to vote, right? Which sounds kind of like this weird sort of pseudo dating, right? Like you spend a bunch of money on dinner, and then at the end of the dinner, you're like, hey, now you're going to do something for me, right? Which is not how dating is supposed to work. So no obligations. Okay. But I also need you to understand this, right? Like when the NRA takes Ted Cruz out to dinner, are they buying his vote?
Yeah. Or attempting to.
No. Is Ted Cruz going to vote against gun legislation anyways? Yes. Right? If there's a piece of legislation that says, hey, we're going to ban all guns, Ted Cruz is voting no on that. He's not going to vote to ban all guns. So when the NRA takes him out to dinner, it's like, hey, Teddy, we need you to vote no on this. Ted's like just shoving that Kobe beef in his mouth, which now I have an image of that in my mind, and that's disgusting because nobody wants to watch Ted Cruz eat. Okay? But Ted Cruz was going to vote the way the NRA wanted him to vote in the first place. The NRA is not buying his vote, right? Does the NRA take Nancy Pelosi out to dinner and be like, hey, Nancy, we would like you to vote against this? No, because they're not going to waste their money on Nancy Pelosi because they know that Nancy Pelosi is going to try to get rid of all guns, period. Right? And that being said, lobbying, what lobbying really is, because that's the weird thing that you'll remember, but what lobbying really is, and what interest groups really do. And interest groups do play a vital role in our government, and they're actually a good thing. Interest groups provide knowledge. Knowledge is power, right? Like the smarter you are, the more knowledgeable you are, the better things should be, theoretically. Interest groups provide that knowledge because we have 535 congressmen. That's it. 535 out of 330 million people, right? Our Congress is responsible for all aspects of government and American life, right? So what does that tell us about those 535 people? How much do they know about everything? Very little. Congressmen are stupid. Okay, let's take the dude from North Carolina, the 25-year-old that's in the House of Representatives from North Carolina, right? What?
How do you make it?
Well, it's North Carolina. Like North Carolina's a little special, right? Also, he had a really great story that made him sound like a real great person that now probably turns out to be BS, right? Like he's a paraplegic, so he's in a wheelchair, and he is wheelchair bound because he was in an automobile accident in which his friend was driving, and his friend left him for dead, which is apparently not true. And then at the time, he was training to go enter the U.S. Naval Academy, and he was going to be a military officer. Right. So now he's like, instead of feeling sorry for himself, like he trained for the Special Olympics. No, he never at any point in time was he on like any qualifying event for the Special Olympics. He was also rejected from the Naval Academy, so he wasn't planning on going to the U.S. Naval Academy. But hey, North Carolina voted him into office. He's 25, right? Like 25-year-old frat boy. He looks like the frattiest frat boy you could possibly imagine. Madison Cawthorn. Okay. Now, do you really think that this 25-year-old dude is smart? No. Right? You really think that this 25-year-old dude understands like economic foreign policy? He looks like one. I mean, I don't know him, so I'm not going to pass judgment on him, but he looks like the frattiest frat boy ever.
So they picked these congressmen just for lobbying?
What do you mean?
Like,
No. So it's not that they're picking out the individual congressman. It's that they're trying. So Representative Cawthorn is 25, right? There's a whole bunch of things that he doesn't know, right? Let's take Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez because she started. She's really young too, right? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez grew up in New York City, right? She went to college at I think Boston University. I might be wrong on that, right? But she went to college in an inner city, right, or in a city, right? Do we really think that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez understands anything about farming?
no.
Probably not, right? Do I blame her for not knowing anything about farming? No. Do I expect her to know a ton about farming? No. Do I expect her to vote on farming legislation as a member of the House of Representatives? Yes. So how is she going to learn? That's what interest groups are for. Because they're specialists. So our congressmen are what we call generalists, right? They have to know a little bit about a whole lot of stuff, right? But interest groups are specialists. They know a whole lot of stuff about one thing. And so they pass that knowledge on. And that's really what lobbying is. It's a matter of passing knowledge on. Like, here's all of this information that I'm going to give to you to hopefully get you to vote the way I want you to get you to vote. Okay. Now, that being said, you do need to understand that there is something called lies, damn lies, and statistics. You ever heard of that term? No? Okay. So lies, you know what a lie is, right? Okay. Right. So like my wife, like we're going to get ready to go to dinner, and she looks at me and she's like, honey, does this outfit make me look fat? I'm like, no. Right? Like, I'm kidding. I love my wife. My wife doesn't. Anyway, but so like a white, but that's what you would call like a white lie, right? Like.
So you're lying?
No, I love my wife. Like damn lies. Damn lies would be like big lies, right? So like if I was cheating on my wife, which I'm not cheating on, and then she was like, "Are you sleeping around on me?" And I was like, "No." That's damn lie. Right? And then there's statistics. And so what are statistics?
Your text
The biggest lies. No, believe it or not, they're the biggest lies. And this is something that like I wish more Americans understood. Like this is one of the reasons why I'm glad you're in my class, that hopefully you'll understand this sort of concept, right? I'm gonna make the numbers up because I haven't looked them up in a couple of years. I used to look them up every time I had this conversation with you. But let's just assume for the sake of argument, and my numbers will be relatively accurate in terms of percentages. Right? But let's just assume for the sake of argument that 100,000 people die by gun violence, right? With gunshots every single year in America, right? 100,000. Preventable deaths, is that a problem?
Yes,
Yes. Is it a gun problem?
yes.
It depends on the situation.
I don't know, man. I mean, that seems pretty much like a gun problem. Now, that would be an accurate, like, statistic, okay? And I don't know what the number is. What if I then told you that 80%, because it generally falls between 70 and 80% of gun deaths annually are self-inflicted?
It's still a good problem.
Is it? Or is it a mental health problem?
Well, it's both, because they get access to that gun to kill themselves.
But who
It's
needs
still
that?
supposed, anyway.
But see, here's the thing, because you're actually going to get where I'm going. You're already where I'm going, right? Because here's the thing. So now I presented that second piece of information to you, and you're like, well, that's more of a mental health problem, right? That's more of a mental health problem, right? But then I can also present to you information that says 90% of people that attempt to take their own life and are unsuccessful never try again. Right? Now you're back being like, well, no, it's definitely a gun problem too then, because gun problems are a highly lethal means of suicide, right? You don't generally survive an attempt by gun, right? Whereas, you slit your wrists, like your likelihood of survival is much higher. Okay? All right, so now we're back to it being a gun problem, yes? Right? But then what if I also told you that those 90% include people that swallowed a bottle of aspirin and then called their girlfriend and was like, I'm gonna kill myself if you don't take me back. Right? Like, is that a real suicide attempt, or is that what we call a cry for help?
Cry for help.
Yeah, it's not a real suicide. But that counts in the 90%. Because I can do whatever I want with the statistics, right? I can define things however I want. Right? Which is why you have to realize that when you're looking at statistics can be highly manipulatable. Okay? In January of, I believe it was 2018, in January of 2018, just in the 1 month of January, there were 32 school shootings. You remember all of those?
No.
No, of course you don't. Okay? Because one of the school shootings was where somebody shot out the window of a parked school bus with no one in it with a BB gun. Is that a school shooting?
No.
Probably shouldn't be. Right? Another one of those 32 school shootings was where a 45-year-old man drove to an elementary school on a Saturday, no one was around, shot himself in the parking lot. School shooting? Probably not. One of those 32 school shootings occurred at a community college where they trained police officers. A police officer cadet accidentally discharged his own firearm. No one was hurt. School shooting? No, shouldn't count as a school shooting, right? So I can take statistics and do whatever I want, but that's really what lobbying is, right? Which is why you also have people that are lobbying on both sides, because believe it or not, right? And Kellyanne Conway got all kinds of crap for this, like 4 years ago, when she was like, well, we have alternative facts. And people were like, can't have alternative facts? That's stupid. There's just facts. No. Because if I can manipulate statistics to say whatever the hell I want them to say and not technically be wrong, right? Because look, like I said, all of those were shootings that involved a gun and a school. School shootings, right? But at the same time, when we talk about these school shootings as violence in America and problems in America, is that really what we're talking about? No. We're not talking about the accidental discharge of a firearm of a police cadet at a community college where no one is injured. That shouldn't be counted, right? If we're trying to solve the problem with school shootings, right? But we can also count it to make it seem like the problem is a lot worse than what it really is. So, all right, continuing on. So they're going to try to influence Congress, because Congress is the ones that makes policy. Interest groups, though, will also try to influence bureaucracy, and it is important for you to know that because bureaucracy is what implements law. They enact law, or they carry out law. Congress generally writes laws that are very vague, and so then the bureaucracy, we'll get to this when we get to Congress, then the bureaucracy basically gets to do whatever the heck they want, right? Like, yeah. And so now interest groups also go to the bureaucracy and are like, hey, you should influence, or you should enforce it this way, because that's the better way to do it, right? That's just sort of example of how influence occurs and how they go about doing it. Interest groups can use the media. They can go directly to the targeted member of Congress. I mean, the NRA can go to Ted Cruz. I mean, not Ted Cruz, because nobody likes Ted Cruz. That'd be a bad example. But the NRA could go to, I don't know. No, we're not going to use the NRA. An environmental interest group could go to AOC and then try to get AOC to influence some of the other members of her squad or whatever they're called, you know, to build up enough support so that you get members of Congress to try to influence other members of Congress. This brings us to iron triangles, which is a term that you need to understand. An iron triangle is simply obviously 3 points: bureaucracy, Congress, interest group, and then things go in both directions, right? So Congress is getting information and money from the interest group. The interest group is getting access and legislation passed the way they want it to. Again, the interest group is giving information to bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is actually seeking out information from the interest group. And then Congress and bureaucracy interact because Congress writes the laws, passes the laws, bureaucracy implements the laws. So that's sort of the idea. Now, obviously, if you're trying to influence Congress, we probably need to be aware of that, right? Especially if you're spending like millions and millions of dollars to do it. So we do have some regulations on lobbyists and what they have to do, and like lobbyists have to actually be registered as lobbyists, and then they have to like dictate what pieces of legislation they're trying to influence. But like with all things that our government does, there's all kinds of loopholes, right? Because lobbyists basically get to self-define what they're there for, which is problematic. What else do I really need to get through? That's, for the most part, that's probably it. That's not terrible. I'll post the lecture of this though on D2L. So like the one that's recorded, that's probably about 45 minutes. It's not terribly long because this isn't a real long topic. But it'll cover the last couple of slides there that we didn't get through. All right. Wonderful, guys. Thanks. Okay, where are the rest of you though? It's like four more people